So I asked Mike O'Grady if he would come in and just give us a bit of an overview on the reports that the reports that are due to the committee during our time here this year, which have already come in, and we've talked about some of them, but talked about some of them, referred to some others, and then there are many that I don't think and we're not gonna go into depth, any of them in depth right now, but I thought it would be helpful at least to sort of know that they're out there, and I think Mike will spend a minute or two on each of them, just so we can get a sense of that, and then.
Sure. So, this is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. The General Assembly has oversight authority over the various executive branch agencies. One of the ways that the General Assembly exercises its oversight authority is to require agencies to report to the General Assembly as a whole or to specific committees about particular issues. And it's can be very effective way to track what an agency is doing, especially on discrete issues. But sometimes the reports get lost. And to avoid the issue of unnecessary reports that are not digested by the General Assembly, there is what's called the reports repeal. So when the General Assembly enacts a report that is intended for oversight, unless you say that it will not repeal after 5 years, it repeals automatically. Each committee has an opportunity to look at the repeals list every year to see if they want something that is scheduled to repeal to continue on, and then you can legislate that. But you should know that when you are enacting a report, if it's an ongoing report, unless you notwithstand the 5-year requirement, that report repeals. With that said, you still get a lot of reports. You have about 29 on the list that's in front of you, and there are 3 that are not on the list that you probably want to hear about as well. So you get about 30 to 33 reports this biennium. Some of them are not in yet because the date is later. For example, VHCB, their reports always come in on January 31st, so you haven't received them yet. And some of the reports that are on this list you won't get until 2024 or later. So with that said, I'll start stepping through the reports.
Representative O'Brien.
Mike, so if we take an example of like working groups and study groups, like you did the wetland one a few years ago.
Yep.
So that's still in play, or if we wanted to revisit it?
No, because the way that was drafted, it was a one-time report, and then the group expired after a time. So you don't have like these lingering entities out there that on their own initiative say we're going to meet again and produce another report. If you want an ongoing report, you have to say it's ongoing. Otherwise, we're going to draft it as a one-time.
Representative Templeman.
Why are some not appearing on the repeal list?
So why are they not appearing on the repeal?
There were 3.
All right, they're not on the report chart.
Oh, very good.
And it was one I know is because the report was to the General Assembly as a whole and not to the committee. And so it just didn't wind up on the chart.
Got it.
One of which I don't know why it didn't wind up on the chart. It's an annual report from the Agency of Ag about their water quality financing. I don't know why it's not on the chart. It should be on the chart. And the other is kind of this PUC Rygate kind of, I can see how somebody didn't think it belonged on this chart, but you might want to look at it because you have forestry more specifically within your jurisdiction these days.
Who compiles the chart or updates it?
It's largely constructed by our office. At the end of each year, we do act summaries, and part of the act summaries is we have to put in any report that is in that act that gets included in the chart. So it's usually our office that is the one that's creating it. Okay. Well, the first report you don't need to deal with because it's done. It's been repealed. It shouldn't be on the chart anymore. So I'm not going to spend any time on that. Then
Have it? So I think that it's now loaded. If you refresh the McKinney page, as you can see on today's date.
Under handouts or?
No, go to date.
Okay.
It's just the one document for today.
okay. The second report, the one from A&R regarding revising basin plans, Federal Clean Water Act requires A&R to do something called continuing planning. And they fulfill that by doing basin plans, which are basically land use plans for the use of the state's waters. And those plans can affect farming and agricultural activities. And consequently, you get a report on how they are doing their basin plans, so that if an issue arises in a basin plan that affects farming, you will have some notice of it. The third report is the Petroleum Cleanup Fund report. It's not yet in this year. Petroleum Cleanup Fund is effectively a state mandated insurance program for persons that have certain types of underground or above ground petroleum tanks. Farmers have petroleum tanks, diesel tanks on their farms. The PCF can help farms when there's a leak. It's effectively an insurance fund. So you get a report from the PCF. The PCF report includes those responses that it makes. So you can see when a farm is being assisted by the PCF. They're usually really good about getting their reports in. I don't know why their report isn't in right now. The next report is a report that A&R on its own initiative consolidated with many other water quality reports into one report. So it's called the Clean Water Initiative Performance Report. It includes basically the update on Lake Champlain. It includes the water quality financing. It includes the status of other waters other than Lake Champlain. It includes activities in those waters, including cleanup plans for those waters that are impaired. It's basically the General Assembly had about 6 or 7 different water quality reports, and they said enough of that, and they just did one. And nobody's really objected to that. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different reports that are consolidated in this document. And you get 5 of those reports. And it's all in this document. Moving on, the next report, the Activities and Performance of Forest Products Liability Program. That is not in yet. That's a VHCB report. That's due January 31st. The Forestry and Forest Products Liability Program, it's a voluntary program to provide assistance to Vermont timber harvesters, foresters, and forest product manufacturers to enhance financial success and long-term viability. They provide kind of services like an accountant, a financial planner, tax assessments, that kind of thing, to help a forestry and forest products business succeed. The next report is the Housing and Conservation Trust. Again, another VHCB report. VHCB, one of their duties is the conservation of agricultural land. And so you get a report from them on their progress or their success in the previous calendar year in doing so. The next report is activities and recommendations of the Joint Legislative Government Accountability Committee. For a long time, the General Assembly had a bee in its bonnet that every program had to have what was called results-based accountability, that there was some way to measure the success or progress of a program or requirement that you enacted. And there was a government accountability committee that was set up to track results-based accountability of all these programs and recommend changes. Well, the Government Accountability Committee, if you look at its results-based, didn't result in a lot and is going to be recommended for repeal. You're not going to get a report from them this year because they're recommending that they themselves be repealed.
You're going through these sort of chronologically. The first one mentioned would have been the oldest or the first.
I'm going through them basically how they're in the table. They should be in here generally chronologically, but sometimes the reports are shifted. I can't guarantee that they're in here chronologically.
So thinking about the 5-year rule then, and would the ones that you mentioned so far be ones that had that non-sunset provision in the statute, so they're permanent essentially?
I think most of these have had the provision that said that the repeal does not apply to them. Okay. Should I move on?
Yeah.
A few years ago, the General Assembly established something called the Livestock Care Standards Advisory Committee. Actually, I skipped over one. The next was the report on Ag and Forest Products Development Board, Goals and Outcome. That was repealed several years ago. I'm not sure why it's on the list. So that report, 2966, that's repealed. So then the next report is the policy recommendations of the Livestock Care Advisory Council. It was a group that was established by the General Assembly to provide policy recommendations to the General Assembly of the state regarding care, handling, and well-being of livestock. Their report comes in, they meet pretty regularly. They're pretty diligent. I don't think their report is in. And they don't have a lot of recommendations this year because they've gotten a lot of their recommendations enacted in the past couple of years. So not much of a recommendation this year. The next is the Pest Control Compact. It's the one that says activities for preceding year, 6 VSA 981. The state enters these what are called interstate compacts so that they can work with other states on certain issues or subject matter that arise. The most intuitive one to me is the forest fire compact. So like if there's a forest fire that breaks out in Massachusetts, Vermont may send some resources there to help them or vice versa. Well, there's one for the pest control compact. If a pest infestation occurs, there's actually an insurance fund that all the member states pay into that provides money to the state with the infestation. And then that the state can draw down on to try to combat that infestation. And then the states can also help each other. You're supposed to receive a report from the administrator of the pest control compact. You don't usually receive it. They just usually put it up on their website. This is one of the most like hardline conservative compacts. They're like, do not change anything in our language. What we tell you happens, we control the money. They're kind of a hardliner. So you don't get a report because they say they don't need to give you a report, even though your statute says you're supposed to get a report.
And sorry, remind me anyway of which compact that is. That's,
The pest control
Okay.
compact.
yes,
Do
Representative.
they still use DDT in that outfit?
No, they do not.
That's one good thing.
The General Assembly has banned DDT, and you did that before the feds, and the feds subsequently banned DDT as well in 1970. So,
Yes, Representative O'Brien.
So would that be under like Department of Interior? Like, where's that coming from? Is it just a,
no, it's its own thing.
oh, wow.
It's its own private nonprofit entity. That all these compacts are usually just an association that states create themselves. And then they live on they have offices, some of them are really good. Really effective. Some of them are like, you never hear of them. There's tons of compacts. Some of them are really, really good. The professional licensing ones, those are usually like awesome. But some of these, you don't hear too much about them.
Would these be considered quasi-government?
No, they don't. Yeah, that's in some definitions maybe, but I would say because they're not within a state government, they're just the overseer of a uniform body of law across multiple states. I think it's a good question. You could probably have a Socratic debate about that. Should I move on?
I think so.
So the next is an important one, and it's an important one because it involves the Agency of Agriculture's regulation of agricultural water quality. So the Federal Clean Water Act requires discharges of waste to water to get a permit, and states can be delegated that authority from EPA, and Vermont was delegated that authority. And the way that the Clean Water Act is drafted, the Federal Clean Water Act, waste from a point source needs that permit. And point source is defined like this. It's a pipe, it's a ditch, it's a conveyance, it's a concentrated animal feeding operation. So a farm is the same thing as a pipe underneath the Federal Clean Water Act. In 2004, there was a lot of litigation and a lot of federal rulemaking about that. And the federal court said, yes, that farm needs a permit if there is an actual discharge from that. Like if there's pollutant running from that farmyard into the waters. But EPA wrote a rule that said all these farms need a permit, but we encourage state agencies of agriculture to work with farms so they never get to the point where there's an actual discharge. And so no permit is necessary. And that is why this state has an A&R pollutant permit, discharge permit, and why the Agency of Agriculture has an ag water quality permit for LFOs, MFOs, and small farm.
Can you just, LFO, MFO?
Large farm operation, medium farm operation, small farm. What the legislature did is it said the Agency of Agriculture will regulate ag water quality, provided that there is no discharge from a farm. So what all those rules, LFO, MFO, small farm, RAPs say is farms can't have a discharge. They don't have a discharge, they're regulated by the Agency of Agriculture. If they have a discharge, A&R has to regulate them under the Clean Water Act. And what happens is there's tension between those two agencies when there is a potential discharge. And what the General Assembly did to try to resolve that tension is to tell them to enter into a memorandum of understanding of how they're going to handle any of those issues that occur when there is a potential discharge. They wrote an MOU. They're supposed to report to you about that MOU each year, including their goals and outcomes under that MOU. You made them like put into, you said in statute, when you write this MOU, you're going to have goals, you're going to have outcomes, you're going to have performance. It was like, you know, like telling your kid, what's your goal? How are you going to get to it? You know, and they do it and they report to you every year about how they've implemented it and what their performance goals are and how they've met them.
Representative Supernath.
Will there always not exist that tension unless the RAPs are strengthened to be more in compliance with what A&R is putting out for water quality?
So what Representative Serpenot is referencing is they don't get along. They really don't. And over time, it's gotten bad some years to the point, like a couple of times you told the Secretary of Administration one time to like, go take them off to the side and tell them to cut it out and figure it out and report back on what they're going to do. Like literally that was basically what the language said. You had to legislate it. It got that bad. It's not that bad anymore, but yes, I think the tension's always going to be there because what A&R considers a discharge isn't always what Agency of Ag considers a discharge. What Agency of Ag thinks they can resolve immediately so that the discharge ends and that it doesn't need to be reported. Well, sometimes, you know, sometimes there's not agreement on whether or not one agency complied with the MOU or not. There was a big Public Records Act request by one of the environmental advocacy groups a couple of years ago of the Agency of Agriculture trying to show that the agency wasn't completely complying with the MOU. I think it was a little bit taken out of context, the public records, but it shows that tension.
Yes, Representative Templin.
I'm sorry, just clarification, MOU,
Memorandum of Understanding.
and that's what these reports are.
This one report, it's on your second page and it's about maybe 2/3 of the way down. It says meeting MOU, Ray non-point source pollutants.
Yes.
I think that report just came out. That's one of the ones that's.
Yeah, it's here. They put it in January 15th. The Agency of Ag is usually pretty good with their reporting.
Yes, Representative Nicole.
Just to really illustrate my understanding here of the contention point here is would you be able to provide an example of a form of discharge that they disagree about what qualifies like versus A&R versus agency of ag? Like what's something controversial that they?
Sure. Do you know what bunk silos are? It's those like, they look like concrete foundations and they put corn in them and then they cover them with plastic and tires. So when it rains on that, even though the plastic is there to prevent mold from what, there's some runoff from them. And most of the bunk silos are placed so that they're not going to run off into water, but sometimes they do. For a while, there was a disagreement between the agencies about whether or not that runoff from the bunk silo into a ditch that might go to a water was a discharge or not. And they finally got to a point where they were like, all right, let's just manage the bunk silos so that they don't have that leachate runoff and we don't have the disagreement anymore.
Representative Rice?
The delegation of this from EPA, is that just what they do for every state, or is it similar to like the equal to thing that we hear about with the SCA and the on-farm slaughter?
It is, the majority of the states get delegated. Many of the western states don't. So I would say that there's about 30 to 35 states that are delegated. And you can get delegated for some things and not for others. So for example, Massachusetts is delegated for some, but not for stormwater, I think.
And what is that, just like what a decision of what they have capacity for, or what's the?
It's usually a policy decision. And then on those policy decisions were usually made in the 70s. Like that's when Vermont got delegated. Literally, I have the delegation. It's like on like those copy machines, you know. Yeah, and barely see the text, but I have it.
Representative O'Brien.
Like, did this come up at all during the Roosevelt Right to Farm? You know, was that something that Agency of Ag sort of said that's not a discharge, or A&R called in as experts, said, yeah, that was a discharge?
So discharge really wasn't the issue. It was wetlands where A&R got involved. And A&R did bring an enforcement action, and the Roosevelts did settle with that. They admitted that they had disturbed wetlands without a permit, and it wasn't within the farming exemption. So they did pay a penalty.
Okay. Go on. We're near the bottom of page 2.
Yep.
That was the.
I already talked about the basing planning activities. It's just that there are 2 statutes that require a report on it. It's the same report that I've already referenced. I've already referenced the Clean Water Fund investment report. It's that one where all the 9 were consolidated. The Clean Water Fund audit, when the Clean Water Fund was set up, does everyone know what the Clean Water Fund is? It's a special fund that was created to collect multiple sources of revenue to be used by the state to meet the State Water Quality Initiative. EPA, when they denied the Lake Champlain TMDL, required the state to have a consistent annual revenue source for clean water funding, and that's what goes into the Clean Water Fund.
We heard TMDL yesterday, and I think I know what it stands for, but can you spell it out?
Sure. I'm gonna step back to give you context.
That would be helpful too, yeah.
The Clean Water Act requires all states to have water quality standards for their surface waters. And those water quality standards are supposed to ensure traditional uses of the water, recreation, fishing, boating, use for drinking water, use for agriculture, and aesthetics. And every 3 years, the state is supposed to go out and review its waters to see if they are meeting the water quality standards and whether or not all those traditional uses are continuing to be allowed in each of the waters. If the traditional use is not being allowed, then the water is dictated to be impaired. And if the water is impaired, it has to go onto a list of impaired waters. It's called the 303D list. And the 303D list lists water not just by the whole water, but by segments. So parts of a water can be impaired or the entire water can be impaired. Lake Champlain in Vermont, all the Lake Champlain portions are impaired, but the segments are impaired for different things. And then on the 303D list, the state is supposed to say what is causing the impairment. For example, in Champlain, it was phosphorus runoff. Once the state has identified the impairment, identify the source of the impairment, they have to come up with a way to fix the impairment. And there are a couple of different ways to do that, but the most common is called the total maximum daily load.
TMDL.
It's you can think of the TMDL as the budget that you want of that particular pollutant that will bring the water back into compliance with the water quality standards. It's a budget. It's kind of your goal. How you get to the goal is called the implementation plan. The implementation plan is something that states generally come up with on their own. EPA has to approve every TMDL for every impaired water. If a TMDL is in place for several years, anyone can petition EPA to say that the TMDL isn't meeting the standards that are set for TMDLs in federal law. That's what CLF did for the Vermont portion of the Lake Champlain TMDL. They petitioned EPA and said, the Lake Champlain TMDL isn't providing reasonable assurances or an adequate margin of safety that this water is going to be cleaned up at all. And EPA agreed with them, which is surprising because when EPA disapproves a TMDL, guess who has to issue the new TMDL?
EPA.
EPA. And they don't like to do those kinds of things.
Must be kind.
But they did. They're supposed to issue it, the new one, in 90 days. Took them 3 years. But it was probably good that it took 3 years because when EPA issues its own TMDL, they have to use their enforcement tools. And they only have a few enforcement tools, and it's largely through permitting. And so they would have done things like required the wastewater treatment plants in Vermont to go down to like 0 phosphorus, which would have been millions and not hundreds of millions of dollars. They would have required all farms to get a federal Clean Water Act permit, regardless of actual discharge, because they could say it's something called, I won't go into why. It's just too. They would have required more permits for construction. And, you know, they would have used their like tiny little enforcement toolbox in a pretty onerous way. So what the state said is like, hey, let us give you an implementation plan that isn't focused on your tiny little toolbox. And if you agree with that, we'll do that and we'll meet your TMDL. And so that's what the state did. It took a while. Largely because EPA had to approve everything. There was a model to show that what Vermont was proposing was going to be meet the TMDL. And ultimately EPA approved it. They give us report cards, like literally it says report card. And, you know, we've been doing well.
So, yeah, I was just going to say, this is very interesting, fact-filled 5 minutes of background on a topic that we probably should spend, a day learning about. And we're talking about it in the context of a report that has to do with a fund that's related to it.
I have a PowerPoint.
Okay, good. Yeah, PowerPoint that you've used in other situations. Yeah,
The entire body, yeah.
great. Yeah, I think that would be helpful because it's really kind of, helpful, given what we're talking about. Representative O'Brien?
Just your 1 minute, where are we now? Is the Connecticut River watershed, like, where is it in this process? Is it impaired for nitrogen and our TMDL's on the way?
So the TMDL that affects the Connecticut River is the Long Island Sound TMDL. Because a Long Island Sound is impaired for nitrates and nitrogen. And so when there's a TMDL, EPA works its way up the watershed to try and implement measures to eliminate the impairment. So they're phasing in the TMDL for Long Island Sound. They did it for the Sound. They did it for the first phase, like Connecticut and Mass. And then we're the second phase. There will be a TMDL that's implemented for Connecticut River. I honestly don't know what the state can do. I don't know what the state can do. Because you've banned nitrogen and fertilizer, except ag fertilizer. You brought the nitrogen levels from the wastewater treatment plants down to almost zero to drain into. What else do you do? You're gonna probably have to go at ag.
When's that coming?
I don't know. It's the last time I looked, it was 2024, but I wouldn't hold EPA to that.
Representative Lipsky?
My question has to do with PFAS and PFOS and those complex issues, which my understanding is the federal EPA sets those standards. How are we doing in the Lake Champlain watershed with regard to those? Because one meeting I was at, the EPA was going to drastically lower to almost unmeasurable low levels. And also, my understanding is that the city of Burlington actually gets its potable water from Lake Champlain. And I understand there aren't PFAS in there, but many of our public water supplies do have. So how are we addressing that?
Is there a short answer to that question? Just mindful of the list and the time that we've got, and if we don't want to cut off the question, we can talk about it, but we could also defer it if that makes more sense, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I have an answer. I can talk to you in the hall or elsewhere. So the next report is the Rural Economic Development Initiative. This relates to the BAA, so I'm going to skip over this, and when I talk about the BAA, I'll come back to this. The next is financial assistance for farmers implementing ag practice to improve soil health. This is the payment for ecosystem services. And so this is that. It's actually only like 30 pages of report and then like 400 pages of appendix.
Are you holding the official report? Is there one paper copy that?
No, I had Tony make this for me.
Okay.
Because I wasn't gonna scroll through 400 pages online. But Tony he does this in like 10 minutes if you want a copy.
Is there an official hard copy these days, or are they always?
We actually ask them to submit electronically. And there is a place on the website that says legislative reports. And if you click on the main tab on that, you'll get two options. One will say find legislative reports, one will say reports and research. You click on find legislative reports. It'll show every report since 2009. So to filter that, you just have to go to the filter box and put in agriculture, and you'll get any that the Agency of Agriculture submitted. Or natural resources, whatever you're looking for. Put in a keyword and the keyword search works pretty well. So this payment for ecosystem services relates to the climate action plan, paying farmers for practices, regenerative farming, or carbon sequestration that has a beneficial effect above the mandatory minimum requirements for farming. The next is the status of rulemaking for the food residuals composting. A few years ago, 2012, the state required or prohibited the land filling of food residuals. Farms started taking some of that stuff onto their farms and creating compost from the food residuals. In so doing, they put their farming status at risk because production of compost, when it's not principally produced on the farm, when you're bringing more of your ingredients from off the farm onto the farm, that's not farming, or wasn't. That's compost production. Compost production doesn't qualify for municipal land use exemptions, Act 250 exemptions, et cetera. So there was a anxiety among those small farmers, especially who are importing food residuals for compost, about losing their farming status. It's called the Chicken and Compost Bill because you came up with a resolution to define those small farmers that are importing food residuals as farming if they have poultry on their farm or they are principally using the compost on their farm. You get a report on how that's going, and that's what that report is supposed to be right here. There's something called the Ag Innovation Board. The Ag Innovation Board took the place of the Pesticide Advisory Council. What you require this board to report on are basically how the state should regulate neonicotinoid pesticides and other innovative aspects of agriculture. The board was in its first year this year. They issued a report, but they actually don't give you any recommendations. They said that they were just busy trying to figure out what they were supposed to do, basically. So no recommendations, but they're up and running. You are supposed to get a report from the Agency of Ed about local food incentives. They gave you that report. They said it's going pretty well, $750,000 worth of local food purchased by schools, in the last year. So, so 775,000. So, got a report on that. Last year, there was implemented a surface water withdrawal program at A&R. It does affect farmers. Farmers are supposed to report to the Agency of Ag regarding their surface water withdrawals. The Agency of Ag is supposed to give that information to A&R, and A&R is supposed to give you a report, but it's not due until February 15th. Last year, you also amended use value to allow what was called, and I drafted it.
Reserve forest land.
Reserve forest land, to be enrolled in use value. The agency is the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation is supposed to give you a report on the criteria they're going to use for reserve forest land. They submitted their report on December 30th, and it goes into what those criteria are. So you don't necessarily need to manage forest land for timber anymore, and it's easier to enroll that kind of land than it used to be. You're also supposed to get a report on hemp production and how it's going to be regulated. The Cannabis Control Board is taking over hemp, and you did get a report from them. It's incorporated into their annual report, but it talks about how they're going to regulate hemp and hemp products. You're supposed to get a report on, I skipped over one. You're supposed to get a report on best management practices for treated article seeds that are not neonicotinoid treated article seeds. And you're supposed to get draft rules on neonicotinoid treated seeds. Everybody know what a treated seed is? No.
Maybe not.
Okay. So you have what everybody probably thinks of as a seed, what you eat, fruit, whatever. When it's going to be used for cultivation, most commodity crops have some sort of pesticide, herbicide, or fungicide applied to the seed before it is cultivated. And that is then called a treated seed. So most seeds have a fungicide on it, but then it can also have a pesticide or herbicide applied to it depending on the crop. Corn has an herbicide applied to it so that it can then be planted, and then certain types of pesticides can be used without any harm to the corn. And that's called a treated seed. Some of those seeds have what are called neonicotinoid pesticides on them, pesticides created from nicotine. And those pesticides have been linked to bee death and bee loss, colony loss. And there's been an effort to regulate those neonicotinoid pesticides for pollinator health and other reasons. But there was a concern that, what about making non-neonicotinoid seeds available that are not treated? And so you're going to get a report on that. And then the last two on your table, the forest futures. It's a strategic plan for how the state should manage the forest and forestry industry for economic success while maintaining the natural resource in a healthy state. You're supposed to get a draft in July 2023, and then the final in 2024 of January. There's a report that I didn't know about. That's called the New Farmer Resource Coordination Advisory Report. It was in one of the economic development bills. It's about basically assisting new farmers to enter the industry. You're not supposed to get it. Well, actually, you did get it already. I haven't really digested this one since I didn't know it existed. And then you got 3 reports that aren't on your table. One is the Agency of Ag's report on how they finance ag water quality and the money that moves. They move a lot of money. They do it through a lot of different projects. Some are just state-based, some are programs that they implement with the feds, but they move a lot of money. And Laura DePietro can probably give you the best breakdown of that you would want. This is the PUC Section 248 report for Rygate. I don't understand it. It's like this. So, and it includes solar generation. I don't. You're supposed to get it. I don't understand it. You should talk to Ellen about that one. And then there was the Natural Resources Board report on accessory on-farm businesses. That came in January 15th. It's a big issue. They make some recommendations. I know the Agency of Ag has some recommendations as well. But that's online. Just put in like accessory or ag business. You should probably get it to come up. So those are your reports.
Thank you, Mike. I'm sort of reflecting on how much work and effort has gone into preparing these reports. And these are just for our committee, or just the ones that we're seeing. And a little overwhelming. Going through that list is a little overwhelming. And I feel like we have a certain obligation to not ignore them. Previous legislatures asked the various entities to put these reports together for us. And I don't know whether it's been the practice of the committee in the past to have people come in and walk through every report. Probably not. Any of the reports, maybe the new ones, but I would guess maybe not consistently the ones that are recurring every year. So it's something to think about anyway. And I would just encourage everyone to, when you have a chance, go back and if there's something that particularly caught your interest, go back and take a look at it. And if you think that's something maybe the committee should be talking about, we can certainly have people in to walk us through each of them, I would imagine. Any final questions? Mike's not leaving us, but we'll be moving to another topic, sort of. Yes, to another topic. So any questions about any of the reports, how to find them, Representative O'Brien?
Like what happens with something like the Dairy Task Force? Is that considered a report, or because it's not an agency reporting to us, or it looks like legislation?
I think that was another one that went to the General Assembly.
Okay.
And so it didn't wind up on that table. But it should have been on that table. That's a report that I drafted from the task force to revitalize the Vermont dairy industry that was supposed to recommend legislative changes to stabilize dairy pricing, among other things, for the Vermont dairy industry. That report recommended 2 legislative initiatives this year. One was to provide additional appropriations for the dairy risk management program that the Agency of Ag pays the premiums for dairy farmers to participate in a federal risk management program. for dairy pricing. And then the second legislative recommendation was to amend the Vermont Milk Commission's authority to set what are called over-order premiums on the price of milk paid to Vermont farmers. It doesn't mandate an over-order premium. It basically just amends that Milk Commission's authority to update it, modernize it, and then it requires the Milk Commission to meet to actually determine whether or not they want to issue an over-order premium or pursue it, really. Anything else, John?
Representative Cole and then Representative Keppelman.
Sure. I received a question from Josie, who's watching online as well, which is just a little bit further direction of finding these. Would the most direct way be through the agency that created them, through their website, or?
I would recommend for those that have been submitted that you just go to the General Assembly's website. Here, I can show you. So, I don't know if anybody can see this or not, but there's a tab across the website, and one of those tabs says reports and research. If you click on that, you should see find legislative reports over here on the left-hand side. You click on that. You'll get every report since 2009, so you don't really want every report, but you can go to this keyword and let's just put in something short and that I can type upside down. All right, so there you get a bunch of which references farms. Oh shoot, I opened one. So anyway, that's the, for those that have been submitted, that's the easiest way, in my opinion, to find them.
Representative Levitt says thank you.
We will, so anything that's come in this biennium, I think we'll post on our on our committee page. And I imagine that perhaps things that came in December are on last year's committee page, so we wouldn't have posted them, but they are all available through what Mike just directed us to.
I don't think last year the committees posted them. I definitely know in the Senate they didn't, because Bobby is very limited in what he posts.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll post them as they come in. Yes, sorry, Representative Keppelman.
Just really quick, Attorney O'Grady, I assume you read all of these. Am I wrong in assuming that?
I don't read all of them.
Okay.
I skim the ones that I think are important, and that I think will be an issue.
Okay. And then I'm assuming those important ones that you believe may be of issue, you probably have some personal opinions about that you don't share with us, or I'm just curious if there's a way you can, within your capacity, you let us know if, hey, like this one you should look at because it bothers me, or is there a way you can kind of highlight stuff for us?
I'm going to do that in a minute for the BAA.
An illustration of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think any of these bothered me. I honestly, the ones that I did read or skim over, I'm always kind of impressed at how well both A&R and Agency of Ag do these reports and comply. A&R has gotten really graphics heavy in their reports and like really short, but they usually include like URLs to supporting material. And the agency bag just has like they've been doing it for so long, they kind of have they're just good at it. They're just good at it. So I didn't really see any issues. One of the things that I know might be an issue, but probably not in this committee, it'll probably be more in Ways and Means or Finance, is the standards for enrollment of reserve forest land and what they're going to require those owners to do. They're going to require them to come into compliance with the AMPs before they enroll. And so that's really a policy decision. And so that's the one that I think the most controversial issue I saw in any of those reports.
Why don't we, unless there are any other questions, did you have a question, Charles?
No.
Okay. Why don't we take 5 minutes just to stretch and get set up for the next petition, and then we'll start right at 11:20.